Hello, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Best of the West, a National League West podcast here for Blake Street Banner. I am your host, Skyler Timmins, joined here, as always, here with Kenneth Weber.
Yep, just sitting here still waiting for that first no-hitter of 2025. We just came so close with Dylan Cease.
It's true, we did. And oddly enough, it is interesting. We're talking like the Astros haven't gotten their yearly combined no-hitter yet. The Rockies surprisingly haven't been no-hit yet, even though they've come very close a couple of times where it felt like they could get no-hit at any moment.
Despite their best efforts.
Despite their best efforts, it has not come to fruition for anybody yet. But Kenneth, of these like five teams in the National League West, who do you think has the best odds to throw a no-hitter this year?
I feel like there's a Logan Webb no-hitter that might be brewing, and also San Francisco is not always the easiest place to hit if the conditions aren't great. So, just gun to my head, I wouldn't have a real true answer, but Logan Webb feels like a pretty good answer with the way he's been throwing so far this year.
Yeah, you look at these teams and like maybe somebody with the Padres again, who after Joe Musgrove broke the seal, like it's just been feels like
Yeah, seriously.
anything's possible out there now.
The Mets are sitting over there watching, like, still waiting after Johan broke that seal for us. But all right, Pavetta would be an interesting one. He's kind of found a new gear out there, but I have a gut feeling that it's not going to be a Rockies pitcher. I'll put it that way.
No, they'll be lucky if they get 3 no-hit innings most of the time.
Yeah, scoreless sixths onward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, but Dylan Cease with the Padres had one going against the New York Yankees, and the Yankees finally broke that up. I think in the 7th inning or so. Pitcher's duel out there because Max Fried was dealing too, 1 run through his 7 innings of work.
It's nice seeing Cease kind of get back into gear again.
Yeah.
Because it was a rough start, as we've talked about on a couple of previous episodes. But that's one of those matchups that you kind of wanted to see: Freed versus Dylan Cease. It's ace versus ace kind of thing. So lived up to the billing at the very least.
Absolutely. But we're gonna roll into things, and Kenneth had also just some quick little I guess makeup work. We apologize to the players that we mentioned had not been hit with injuries, and then we're hit with injuries now. Did we jinx them?
This is what I get for having a plastic table. Every time I knocked, it had zero effect. So sorry, guys.
It happens. Sorry, Justin Martinez with the Diamondbacks, and
Yeah, we'll get there. We'll talk about that some more. So sorry again for when that inevitably comes.
But something that we wanted to do, nice breezy, quick one, is just a quick little overview of some notable matchups coming up here for each of these teams, and then just pinpointing what is a specific need 1 month into the season. Where do these teams stand? What's their biggest need that they need to improve upon? Maybe it's trading something, but filling up a spot in their lineup on the field that needs some work. And so let's kick things off here, Kenneth, with the good old, what did we say? San Diego Padres.
Yeah, the San Diego Padres, which again are hanging strong at the top of the division with the Los Angeles Dodgers. One thing to highlight, because the whole idea with this is we're approaching kind of that quarter mark of the season, time to start taking check on a decent enough sample size. First, Padres are doing the thing. I mean, they are a very good team. They're looking like a playoff team every time you watch them. And they have a pretty nice schedule coming up too. So they have an opportunity to start making some ground. That's kicking off with a 3-game set here at Colorado against the Rockies. They're already swept the Rockies 1 time, so they have a good opportunity to start, pushing that win streak, or building one up, because afterwards they have the Angels, the Blue Jays, the Braves, the Marlins, and the Pittsburgh Pirates all remaining in May, all losing teams. The only winning team that they have to face is hosting the Mariners. So this has the makings of a pretty good stretch for a pretty good team already.
Yeah, that through that first month of the season, pretty decent schedule that they had to face. The Cubs, who have been a really good team, a fun team here to start the season. Now, other teams in that first month, and not at their best. Astros and the Tampa Bay Rays, still good teams, but off to shaky footing. And then the Tigers, who have been off to a good start this season. And then you had the Rockies and that whole weekend, and we'll touch on that here. But for the most part, saying that moving on into this next month, yeah, the schedule's a little bit more in their favor, which helps because you're at this point in the season, you're just wanting to stockpile wins as much as you can to give yourself maybe a little breathing room or set yourself up better later on in the season. Get your nice footing out of the gate, so to speak.
Yeah, it's not like that first month of the season was an absolute cakewalk, though,
Yeah.
too. And so to be hanging around with the class of the National League, if not all of baseball, which I mean, that's kind of what this division is playing out as, against a pretty formidable and solid stretch of teams. Yeah, you can't not be impressed with the Padres. But at the same time, maybe there's been some injuries that they've had to endure. Nothing, earth shattering so far for them. We touched on that in the last episode, where if it's a Tatis that goes down, okay, now we're talking how are the Padres going to survive? But you're seeing some shortcomings a little bit with their roster. So we all knew, hey, this is a top heavy roster, so to speak. And they're kind of throwing whatever they can at the wall to see what sticks in a couple of spots. Right now, especially in that left field position, as we're looking at how they might be able to improve this roster, left field certainly stands out as one place where they could use some improvement.
Yeah, because injuries they didn't come in with the surest plan coming into the season. They lost Jerks and Profar to free agency, went to
And
the
then the
Braves,
Braves lost them again.
and then the Braves, they nobody won in that scenario.
Mhm.
But you lose that, and we already had talked about where they're kind of strapped financially. There's just not a whole lot of money to throw around, so let's go get some veteran deals done. Jason Hayward's in. We'll go get Connor Joe. They're going to be a platoon out there, and then we'll throw one of these other guys in spring training. One of these guys maybe can earn a spot or rookie of some kind. And so with all the injuries already to Jackson Merrill and some other guys, it's just kind of thrown that left field spot a little up in the air.
I think it's magnified it more than anything,
Yeah.
because losing Jackson Merrill, okay, you endured that one. That's probably the biggest blow that they've had, not counting Joe Musgrove, who was already lost before the season started. So now the outfield, Tatis is keeping the units numbers as a whole together pretty well. You look at the outfield in just a quick snapshot, it's doing okay. But then you break it down piece by piece. Basically, Tiso Ornelas, Lockridge, Jason Hayward, Connor Joe, they're really not cutting it. And if you remove 2/3 of that outfield, either in Merrill or Tatis, now those are the same guys that you're asking to fill those voids. So, some bad luck has happened on the right side of their infield, but they have veterans that have been there before in Arise and Cronenworth. You feel okay that they'll bounce back there. I think it's hard as a Padres fan to look at that outfield situation outside of your top two guys and feel okay with the guys that are, at least from what you've seen so far from that group.
Yeah, and you can weather it a little bit better because, like you mentioned, the schedule coming up for them is not as tedious. It's not as going to be as rough, so you can weather some of those storms. But at some point, you got to figure out something's got to click out in that left field. Now, and speaking of positions that need that improvement, left field's going to be that one.
Mhm.
And looking at their numbers, there's a lot of teams whose left fielder is not very good. Dodgers, oddly enough, are in this conversation.
It's not a high bar right now.
It's not a very high bar across the league. Looking at this, most of the National League West is in the bottom 10 in among their left fielder production. Oddly enough, Rockies are the highest between the Dodgers, Diamondbacks, Padres. They're the highest at 20th of left field production.
And that's got to tell you something right there. But like the Conforto signing hasn't really paid
Yeah.
off much, for Los Angeles. And we've talked about Kike Hernandez and Chris Taylor. How much do you have left in that? It's a similar situation for the Dodgers, but there's so many other areas being spent on that roster that, okay, even if one is not optimal, they'll find a way to figure it out with enough hands on deck. San Diego's trying to do it with a shoestring budget. So I just think that gives you less confidence in what they have around is going to be enough.
Yeah, and no, at some point, you just got to hope somebody can step up, somebody can come back healthy, somebody can get hot for a month, and that's the scenario they maybe have to go for. Best case scenario for now, maybe another opportunity arises where you just have to ride the hot hand for as long as you can, and then once it starts to taper off, all right, who's the next guy we can turn to just kind of patch together a left fielder for the season?
Yeah, and Brandon Lockridge has been solid, but he's been missing some time. But I think there's still also just such a he's not quite the proven commodity
Yeah,
heading into this season. So how much do you really buy into 15 games or whatever it is? So
yeah,
it's definitely not a solid answer, but it may be an answer. You don't know yet. And
yeah,
everybody else that has performed at that position hasn't really been very inspiring.
yeah. No, it's like for now, no, they've thrown some guys through. You can ride with that. But if you're still in that race and you're getting into the dog days of summer, into late into June, into the All Star break, that's when you maybe have to really start getting into. Oh, let's see what's out there and how we can improve this roster with the resources we have because they've wheeled and dealed a lot. So maybe capital's not going to be as much. They're not going to be maybe as aggressive in that aspect. Maybe a little more frugal in terms of we're not going to trade away a bunch of our top 10 prospects to bring in a Juan Soto.
Yeah, they definitely don't have the resources to pay for a Juan Soto anymore, unless their lightning strikes and they're able to suddenly trade draft picks by
Yeah,
August. There's not enough kind of available for San Diego to make a major swing. That said, Connor Joe is the name that's coming to mind right now. Imagine Connor Joe when he got acquired by the Rockies a couple of years back. There is buy low candidates that will emerge. I
yeah,
think, over the season. And I think that they are a savvy enough organization to hopefully jump and pounce on some opportunities. But man, they have traded so much over the years. And that Juan Soto trade is a perfect example. So, hindsight's 2020. If they had James Wood right now, we wouldn't be talking about this. But instead, they're kind of in the situation they're in, trying to make the best of it. And you know what? If they do figure it out at least enough, that could be the difference between them eking in as a wild card team or making a very deep run, to the
yeah,
NLCS and beyond. It is that important for them.
yeah. And you think back to a couple years ago when 2023, Jurickson Profar becomes a free agent. Rockies cast him off after
Mhm.
a terrible season. He latches on, finishes out the season with the Padres, and he was really good. And that carried into a really good season in 24. Now there's an asterisk on that 24 season, some shadow of doubt over that,
Yeah.
but he was good in that 23, so we at least know then he liked playing there. So yeah, there's somebody they can pick up off the waiver wire at some point, maybe that can
It's going to be
catch
Profar
fire.
again at this point. Everything just keeps on pointing back to that. If Profar is not in San Diego, it doesn't work for San Diego or Profar. So,
I am
just,
inevitable.
yeah, he'll get back from suspension. He'll go back to the Padres and everything will be fine again.
Yeah. Real quickly here, the other one is kind of that right side of the infield, first base, second base. Luis Arias, Jake Cronenworth. No, they've kind of been that flip flopping, figuring out that whole thing. So far, you've got Arias doing his thing. You don't have to worry too much, but there was reason why he's not that long term solution. Or maybe you could get a wild and say, oh, we can move. Maybe we move on from Arise to get a just fill up some other holes. But I wonder if that could be a scenario they look into of moving a strong piece to just help strengthen other weak spots.
Yeah, I don't know. I have a split mind on that because it does make sense on paper
Yeah,
why that could work out. I think that they would just be more determined to get rid of Luis Arias's money first,
yeah,
though. It's the same way that you had Dylan Cease and Michael King being floated as trade rumor candidates. It's not that they wanted to move on from these guys specifically; it's they wanted to get out of the money, or they know that we're going to be able to afford them, whatever the case may be. So, um, I'm not so sure that the Padres are just in a position to be cutting some of their strengths and expecting to spread it out across their roster. Because again, they're just working on the margin so hard. I think
yeah,
just getting Jake Cronenworth back and healthy consistently and being able to rotate and platoon those two with their versatility and their ability should probably be enough. And that was the plan
yeah,
heading into the season for the right side of the infield. So you feel more confident on that. But if you keep on having lingering injuries or, a Rise is a very it's a very hard ceiling in terms of what he does.
Mm,
Okay, defensively, he's not going to kill you. There's little to no power, but it will be bad on ball skills and it will be a productive hitter at least. You can make that work, but he can't split between both spots on the right side of the infield. He'll need some help. And so if one or both of them don't consistently stay healthy, that's the reason for bringing this up is San Diego
yeah.
could have a problem on their hands if it's not working according to plan.
Yeah, because currently, no, hopefully you can get Cronenworth back because they currently just have 4 designated infielders, and Jose Iglesias is the guy who's getting the bulk of the time at second base, among others.
Hey,
So,
career revival, Iglesias. All it took was like a top 100 Billboard
yeah,
single. But yeah, I mean, so, Iglesias is a perfect example though of kind of what they're trying.
yeah,
And you don't feel good if Iglesias is really the guy that you're leaning on pretty heavily. And that's just the position the Padres are in.
yeah, and he's off to a little bit of a slower start this season, unless he was playing against the Rockies when all of a sudden he turns into the greatest hitter ever alive.
It's
Uh,
amazing.
yeah, but Padres, we'll just see, keep on what's going on, and this upcoming weekend, they're going to be looking to find some success again against the Colorado Rockies, who we'll touch on here very briefly because there's not much to talk about with the Rockies.
It's
But
bad.
after the Rockies got shut out in 3 consecutive games by the Padres back in April, they're going to have their first rematch, this time at Coors Field, coming up this weekend. And a little bit more historically, the Rockies have done better against the Padres. That series kind of threw that out the window. Hopefully, maybe find a little more success at home, but I wouldn't hold your breath most of the time.
Yeah. Yeah, the Rockies, I mean, they're just in such a tough spot right now. I think it will get a little bit better. It's just one of those feelings where it can't get worse, but you could have said the same thing as a White Sox fan last year, you know.
Mhm.
So you can't be proven wrong. It's going to get warmer in Colorado. They're going to get a couple of guys back and hopefully back up to speed, more into the season. So they could start becoming a more formidable opponent, but right now man, if you're the Padres, you are looking forward to that series. And there are quite a few successful teams around the league that are matched up against the Rockies, and I think honestly are just licking their chops for
Yeah.
that matchup.
Yeah, because I think it's in May, it's like most every opponent is at least a playoff team or over 500. They have a winning record.
Everybody, yeah, everybody. The Rangers right now are an even 500, but you have the Tigers. They're finishing up with the Tigers right now. You got that Padres series we mentioned, road swing through Texas, and then against Arizona. Then you have the Phillies, Yankees, Cubs, and Mets. All of them on top of their divisions out, as you cross the Mississippi. So right now, only Texas and Arizona are outside of the wild card picture of all of their remaining matchups. And the Rockies are clearly the worst record in baseball. So it's pretty easy math right there.
The only team without 10 wins this season so far. Yeesh.
It's bad and it's feeling like it's going to get a little bit worse. I
Yeah.
guess just tell us in June, maybe maybe there will be a little bit more meat on that bone, but yeah, it's a tough stretch for the Rockies and the schedule right now at the very least is not doing them any favors.
Yeah. And so that brings the question with the spot that they're in. No, with these other teams we're going to talk about, what spot do they need to improve on to potentially help them in their playoff pursuits? With the Rockies, it's would naturally become okay, who can they sell to try and improve their team? The hard part with that is that there isn't a whole lot in the bargain bin, so to speak. There's not that's slim pickings in the Rockies' barrel of goodies of what could entice other teams because it's hard to determine the value and if the Rockies would even trade them at all. And I think
Yeah,
the top one with this, Kenneth, is their third baseman, Ryan McMahon.
yeah, and that's a big part of this point of the conversation. One, it's if it's talking about team needs, when you have shortcomings up and down your entire roster,
Yeah.
it's a new team is the need, but you can't really put that out there. So it's easy for Rockies fans to turn back and think of all the times that they had guys that they figured were on their way out or were at the very least not part of these next successful Rockies team. And Colorado's management is very adamant on standing firm on that and having way too high of an asking price, probably, and ultimately just not moving from these guys. Ryan McMahon is the most recent example where you look at him this time last year, he was building himself up as the all-star representative for the team. And you're also watching a team like the New York Yankees, who does have a history with previous Colorado infielders. How much that matters is debatable, but have a hole at third base, and it seemed like a pretty easy fit. Rocky stayed firm. No way we're trading him. And now Ryan McMahon's value has kind of plummeted again. So that just brings up the whole conversation of like, if you're not going to move anything, then what's going to change? And for the Rockies, as a team that's clearly not going to be a buyer, what do you have to sell? I guess is the better question. And of anybody that's on an expiring deal that might have held some value, basically the only thing that the Rockies would be willing to move on from, the name that comes to mind is German Marquez. And German Marquez has kind of been the worst starting pitcher in baseball this season. So,
Mhm.
how do you feel about that as a buyer looking at that? You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and it's maybe before the season or before the injuries, teams would have been very enticed by Herman Marquez, but it's the Rockies holding firm. No, we like these guys. They're going to be a big part of it. We're not going to trade them, and
Culture
it's
guys.
hurt them. They clutch on, hold on to them tight until they squeeze the value out of them. And Marquez, unfortunately, he's coming back from the Tommy John surgery, trying to feel healthy, but he's just looked at a sink. Does not look comfortable on the mound. Just nothing is working for him, and he's had a couple of just severe collapses. It's a far cry from the 2021 All-Star Herman Marquez.
Yeah. 0-6 with a 9.9 ERA and 30 innings pitched. A whip that is flirting dangerously close to 2. Like those are just really rough numbers. And none of this is a direct slight on German Marquez. This is a very excellent pitcher for a long period of time. But if we're talking about the here and now, it's just not there. So maybe a team can talk themselves into, okay, well, we still
Yeah,
see these things, believe in a bounce back. He could be somebody that is worth taking a risk on for half of a season of a rental.
yeah,
That's not a far-fetched notion, but at the very best, you're getting pennies on the dollar now for what is considered to be your ace of the rotation and has been for a pretty long period of time. That's just another black eye waiting to happen, which is hard to believe that a deal gets done if that's kind of the feedback that the Rockies management would be getting for making that kind of move. So Marquez, maybe it improves. You hope it improves, obviously. But if it does, then maybe the conversation starts coming up a little bit more. A
mhm,
strong June, and all of a sudden, hey, Marquez is back. Okay, the value might be reestablished. We're in wait and see mode on that. But now, looking up and down the roster, you might have a couple of bullpen guys like a Jake Bird that could, garner some interest. You'll have a Jacob Stallings, maybe that somebody could be looking for a veteran backstop that the
mhm.
Rockies could dangle out there. Other than that, man, I got nothing.
Yeah, and because the logic of okay, well, shop Kyle Freeland, see if anybody would take him, but
Money,
Antonio Senzatella. But then you look at the
money.
contracts.
Ryan McMahon, money.
Yeah,
So they're locked up to guaranteed deals too, which is another thing that goes against the grain of kind of how baseball works. That's why they usually look at those expiring veteran deals because teams aren't wanting to make that monetary commitment all the time
yeah,
too. And so if you have a Ryan McMahon that you just saw hit a new valley after a very high peak last year, do you want to sign up for 3 more years of that roller coaster ride?
yeah.
That's Antonio Sensatella had Tommy John surgery, got shut down, just came back, still has what, another 3 years left on his deal, I think maybe 4. It's a tough ask for other teams, and it ultimately takes two to tango when it comes to these trade talks. So again, it's just hard to see other teams really feeling good about anything on this roster, much less giving up
Yeah.
valuable assets for them.
Yeah, and so that's the hard part of it. Like, and even though you mentioned Jake Bird, that one could be a possibility. But again, it's a guy that still has some team control, and they
Mhm.
love their team control. They don't want to give up. He's one of their guys, and he's also who knows when his value could plummet because he's been having to get overused so much here this season. So it's kind of a lot of mileage on that car, and No, the Rockies are always going to have a high asking price for their guys because they value them so much. Or we hear we didn't find a deal that we liked. We didn't think
Yeah.
the offer was good enough. So it's hard to tell with them. You never
We
know what they're going to do.
Yeah, and we talked backstage. Justin Lawrence was one of those guys that kind of fit a lot of that same criteria that we just mentioned with Jake Bird. And it kind of got ran into the ground to the point where he ended up getting outrighted during spring training, got picked up by Pittsburgh. And so you ultimately lose him for nothing. Even if it wasn't going to be a big splash of a move, it was something that could bring back something really tangible. And again, the Rockies just like to dig their heels in those moments, but there is precedence of them losing these guys for nothing too.
Yeah.
So, yeah, yeah, it's hard to feel good about any of it as somebody that follows the Rockies because
Yeah.
you've seen this play before enough times, and now you know that the tickets are dirt cheap, and you still can't sell them. Like
Yeah.
that's kind of where they're at.
Yeah. No, somebody breaks into your car and leaves more tickets to the Rockies. No.
This guy left me a spare tire. It's flat, but well, yeah, it's awful.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a bad team that is already in a worse situation, and I don't know. It's going to take a long time for this to start
Yeah.
turning around. It feels like.
And you would think like, okay, this team and where they're at, is there any scenario, other teams thinking of what package could we offer them to get a Brenton Doyle,
Sure.
snag a Brenton Doyle away from him who's team controlled for a couple years. I don't think they're going to sign him to an extension like they did Ezekiel Tovar in that
Hmm.
aspect. And there's a lot of guys they're excited about coming up. Cole Carrick among them. Who knows if maybe they come trade deadline, there's a team that says, hey, we got these really nice pieces that we know you need, type of thing. But like, hey, we want Brenton Doyle. What's it going to take? Here's our offer.
Hmm.
And it's enticing enough for the Rockies. Who knows? I doubt it would happen,
Yeah.
but that would be an interesting
This
scenario.
this comes down to just the conversations we never get to hear.
Yeah.
Where let's say Kansas City is like, this is our guy. We want to pair him up with Bobby Witt Jr.
Yeah.
We understand that you're attached to him, but we're determined to make this happen. What does it take? What do the Rockies say to that? Like, do they compromise? Do they meet him halfway and say, "Okay, this is our ideal package, but we're willing to wiggle on that"? Or is it like, "I need Jack Caglione
Yeah.
and three of your next best
Top
five"?
shelf.
Yeah, or don't ever call again because man, you've seen that story way too many times with the Trevor Story, John Gray, whatever the
Brendan
case may
Rodgers.
be. Yeah, so. eh, to expect the Rockies to move on from a guy that they have their affections for, they've proven they don't like doing
Yeah.
that. And what makes it really worth their while? That's the thing that I think everybody wants to know, but we never will quite find out.
Yep. Instead, just hand a 2-year contract to Daniel Bard when he's 30 something, almost
Didn't
40.
lose him to free agency.
Yeah, we didn't lose him free agency. Instead, we lost him to Tommy John surgery.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah,
Rockies.
Rockies in a rough spot.
Yep,
It's really all you have to say.
yep.
But moving on here, let's go to the Dodgers, who, as always, doing Dodger things. They've been hit by a bunch of injuries. We talked about that last week. But currently coming up, a key series for them starting up tomorrow on Thursday. For the upcoming weekend series, facing Arizona for the first time, which it's the way the schedule works nowadays, Kenneth. It's always amazing. We're like, oh yeah, we haven't seen a National League West opponent. This is the first time they're meeting in May. And you're like, what the heck? Why didn't they play in April?
It blew my mind going over the roster or going over the schedules in preparation for this episode and seeing that, oh, this is Arizona's first time seeing them, and this is Arizona's first time seeing them. You're used to it being so front and back loaded.
Yeah,
That for me personally, I'm still kind of catching up and getting used to it. It's like the same way you looked at the endings of the last couple of years, and it's like the Twins are in town to finish the season. That sounds weird, but okay, So it is different, it is unique, but when looking at we'll get to Arizona a little bit more. This is an important series for both teams because this is one of those where, okay, we know we're going to be seeing them down the stretch when it's really intensified, when it really matters.
yeah,
So this is kind of an unofficial kickoff to a stretch run, I feel like, these series coming up.
Yeah, no, and I think Arizona, it's kind of that underdog. If you're wanting a team to root for in the National League West that isn't in California, you're looking at the Diamondbacks, hoping, okay, like this is a team that's made it to the World Series. They've managed to handle the Dodgers fairly well over the last couple of years. It's felt like
Hmm.
I think there'll be a key matchup to just see where they size up at this point in the season early on. Both had a month to play, getting their first meetup. Okay, here's where we stand. We're both banged up in some ways, but let's see how this goes. And it's crucial early series, I think, in the season for them.
I think it's a good litmus test for both of these teams.
Yeah.
And when it comes to the Dodgers in particular, we've touched on the schedule for San Diego and Colorado. They don't necessarily have a cakewalk coming up either. It's a 4 game set coming up with Arizona, which again, it is going to hold some water between these two clubs. You have Oakland, you have the Angels. You feel pretty good about that next week coming up if you're the Dodgers, but then you're right back against Arizona. You have the Mets, you have the Guardians, and the Yankees. So it's a pretty tough stretch crossing that Mississippi again for LA. But they have a little bit of breathing room, but a lot is going to depend on how they fare in 7 games against the
Yeah.
Diamondbacks coming up.
Yeah. No, it's those makes those division games a little more important, especially for the Dodgers, especially more so since the rest of the divisions playing well, aside from one team. Uh,
Yeah,
but everybody else bringing some nice competition where it's not as hope it's not as easy a cakewalk if you're one of these other teams. But for the Dodgers, you still believe, yeah, you've got precedent of we're the World Series champions,
sure.
but everybody else is giving you a little bit better challenge, which in the long run I think kind of is better over the course of a season, makes you a better team in a sense when everybody
And
else
it's
is.
better for baseball.
Yeah, it's better for baseball. It's better for you as a team when you're playing against tough teams, and the Dodgers are getting that. If they wanted to
Yeah.
defend that title, you got to beat the hard teams.
Absolutely. And again, they've earned that benefit of the doubt. They've
Yeah,
earned that target on their back. I guess the way I look at it, and it's going to be very cliche, but the games in May matter just as much as the games in September.
yeah,
So if you're the Dodgers or you're the Diamondbacks, let's say, and you go 1-6, 2-5, in this 2 week stretch head to head against that opponent, man, that's a big 4 or 5 game swing that could be happening and really matter down the road for your playoff
yeah,
aspirations. So it's hard to feel the playoff implications of games this early in the season, but this is a direct head to head that could have some major consequences later on, a couple of months from now.
yeah. Because we know the Dodgers have those. They expect. They believe. Yeah, we're gonna. They expect themselves to be there in October. They're probably already selling tickets. They
Oh,
they have those plans already in place because like, yeah, we're going to be in the playoffs again.
yeah. Hmm.
And so you hope, and I'm sure this isn't the case, that they kind of cruise through things like, oh, we're going to be there anyway. But it's a kind of those reality checks to make sure, yeah, we need to stay focused. Every game counts. It's not just going to be a cakewalk for us to get back to the World Series. This will be a good opportunity for them to continue building on just we're the Dodgers. We're trying to build a dynasty here. And it starts with playing well against these National League West teams.
Taking care of business,
Yeah.
really, just winning the games that you should. Obviously, a lot has changed over the course of a couple of seasons, but I think back to 2018, where it's
Mhm.
game 163 that will decide the
Yeah.
division against the Rockies. A lot of games that could have been taken care of earlier in the season for LA ended up putting them in that situation. And we touched last episode about some of the woes that they're going through with injuries in their starting rotation. In baseball, sometimes that just never stops. And sometimes depletion, especially when it comes to pitching, is just an absolute thing and a gauntlet that you have to endure for a given year. And hey, maybe the Dodgers wake up and it's August and everybody else is still kind of hanging around. They're still
Yeah.
right in the pack at the top of the division, and they're not the 110 win Dodgers that we know they can be. Well, 7 games against Arizona in the middle of May could have major implications then
Yeah.
if they find themselves in that spot later down the road, which is, hey, it's a 162 game season. A lot of crap can happen.
Yeah. And speaking of things that can happen, let's talk about team needs with the Dodgers. Probably the biggest one is what's going over on at the hot corner with third base.
Mm.
Uh, it's it hasn't been the best spot for them over the last couple of years, defensively especially. But currently, you got Max Muncy taking up space over there at third base, not exactly doing Max Muncy things the way
Sort
that
of.
they in the sense of what they've grown accustomed to. It's not as good as it has been in the past.
Yeah. And Max Muncy has also been the only thing at third base. Like they are fully committed and dependent on him at that position right now. And we talked about it during the offseason a little bit, how much of is left with the old guard, so to speak. And you've always known with Max Muncy that he's a three true outcome guy. He's unique in his own way because he's not going to be a 290 hitter that puts up more of a traditional 3-4-5 triple slash. He's going to be a bomber, and he doesn't hit singles; he hits walks or home runs. That's what he does, and it's just slowing down a little bit because you look at his line now. Max Muncy only has one home run so far this season in 130 plate appearances. That's where
Mhm.
okay, this isn't Max Muncy. He's striking out 31.5% of the time. Slow starts happen. He's had slow starts before. I feel like he had a bit of a slow start just off the top of my head last year. He still ended up putting up a 140 OPS plus. So it's there, it's capable, but this is also a 34-year-old Max Muncy where you've seen some signs of regression. You've seen some signs of slowing down. So it's fair to question, can they ride this the entire time? Is Max Muncy going to be part of the solution, or is it going to be part of a problem that holds the Dodgers back? I think it's a very valid question at this point in the season.
Yeah, because and if he's really good on offense, okay, you can forgive some of the defense
Hmm.
because currently, with 2 defensive runs saved, but he's valued at -4 outs above average. They range him at a -2 range or a -3 range. So, and you don't have a lot of some of the other numbers yet, but he's not your best option defensively majority of the time. And so when it comes to looking to fill that need, if the bat's not coming along,
Hmm.
at some point you got to start looking for, okay, this might be the end of the road. We need to find something because some of these other teams are nipping at our heels. We need some more. We need something to lengthen out this lineup even more. Give us more power. They turn into Kylo Ren in Last Jedi, where he's just screaming more.
More. You never went to acquire Max Muncy the glove, right? It's
Yeah,
always been Max Muncy the hitter. So okay, you take some of the lumps with him defensively, some of the limitations, but the bat more than compensates for it. What happens when the bat's not working? Then what is he contributing? So again, you can still have plenty of faith and belief that Max Muncy of old will reappear, but you're not seeing it personally. And kicking off some of the trade speculation and chatter, I don't feel like the table has ever been more set for Nolan Arenado to go to the Dodgers. Like it's always kind of been a thing. He just wants to win. Hometown guy. Dodgers have more money than God and aren't afraid to spend it. It's always made sense on paper, but the Cardinals and the Cardinals and Arenado don't seem like a long-lasting marriage, and the offseason proved that. And the Dodgers have a very specific need for a guy who can hit, doesn't need to be the hitter in the lineup, and also could definitely wouldn't hurt to have a nice defensive upgrade on the hot corner
yeah,
too. Boxes are being checked with Nolan Arenado's name next to each one of those guys. So who knows what changes between now and the end of July and trade deadline season. But man, a gut feeling. This is the year where Arenado ends up in LA. That's kind of what I'm
yeah,
feeling.
yeah. No, that seems like the tailor-made improved third base for the Dodgers. Of course, you go for the biggest name third baseman that could be on the market because
Mhm.
I feel like in this scenario, if an offer deal comes through, Dodgers are like, yeah, we want him. Arenado's gonna say he's gonna agree to it. He's gonna accept that trade.
Probably,
Yeah,
probably
probably.
Arenado has a long history, fair or not, when it comes to being in trade rumors, trade
Yeah.
speculations, just in those circles. So you expect if he's going to say yes to anybody, it's going to be the Dodgers.
Yeah. So it's like in this scenario, it's going to come down to, well, are the Dodgers willing to give up whatever capital or pay that money? Maybe they come to their a little more frugal sense and they're like, no, we actually need to hold on to some stuff. We can't be spending
Maybe.
everything unless they just immediately ask him, hey, can we rearrange a contract to defer that money for the next 30 years?
Yeah, it would be wild if you have Nolan Arenado being paid by 3 teams at the same time. But it's not unrealistic. If you really wanna get into the weeds and geek out on a payroll, maybe you move the remainder of Michael Conforto's salary to try to balance things out for 1 season while taking on a multi-year commitment with Arenado. It you don't have to think very hard to make the money
Yeah.
work, I think, if you're Los Angeles. And that's assuming that the money matters because up to this point, it kind of hasn't. There's just a whole lot of blank checks that get thrown around with this organization. So, again, conversations we're not privy to, but if there is any form of determination by Arenado and the Dodgers, I think they'll make it happen this
Yeah.
year.
Done deal. Yeah. That's the biggest one for the Dodgers, getting that third baseman and getting a bunch of people back healthy. But mainly, you got to figure out third base for the foreseeable future, too, because I think this is Muncy's last season. This is this walk year. So
Yeah,
you don't have to be too married to him as much as you like him. He can be a bench guy, but
exactly.
necessarily need to be in there every single day. And he
Yeah.
can fill in at first base as needed too.
Sure. There's versatility. There is a Kike Hernandez chair sitting there for Max Muncy once he's
Yeah.
out of the regular starting lineup, I'm sure. But what do you have long term behind him? And I don't feel like there's a very solid and strong answer. You don't have, I don't know, a Gavin Lux maybe, where it's just like, yep, as soon as he's ready to go, that's going to be the guy. Not quite somebody like that for LA on the infield knocking down the door. So you
Yeah.
have to find out answers elsewhere. They're in a
Yeah.
good spot to be able to do that, but
Yeah.
that's where we're at.
Now moving on to the Giants here. Again, they've also got their first season series coming up against Arizona. I believe starting next week or over the weekend. Next week.
Yes, Arizona
Starting
gets
next week.
done playing the Dodgers, and then they turn around and face the Giants just to go play the Dodgers again.
There
So
you go. So they're going to be filling out, playing their first series against the Diamondbacks. They just had their first series against the Rockies, I believe at Oracle Park. Uh, pretty handily. Some well games, but for the most part, they handled that series pretty handily. Snuck away with a couple of those wins against the Rockies, but
3 out of 4.
took them 3 out of 4. So the Giants, like we've mentioned before, they're in a spot that nobody quite expected at the moment. They're hanging in there and looking better than maybe expected, but they're still just sort of hanging on, hanging around in the conversation.
Yeah, and fair or not, it's the Giants were always kind of they're not the Rockies, but are they the class of the Padres, of the Diamondbacks, of the Dodgers? That was a fair question. So far, they're in the conversation. It's one thing to take 3 out of 4 against the Rockies. It's another thing to follow that up with 2 out of 3 against the Cubs, which is exactly what they did. So,
Yeah,
I think it's they deserve to be in the position that they're in. And it's funny when we kind of talk about them hanging around because right now you talk about, the Dodgers are going to have a little bit of competition coming up. This could be the chance for the Diamondbacks to start making a run with their upcoming schedule. Right now, there's nothing really too intimidating with the upcoming schedule for the Giants. You got 3 games at Minnesota. There's that series with Arizona we talked about, but then you're following up with or excuse me, I almost called them Oakland, the A's, Kansas City, Washington, Detroit, and Miami. Some decent teams in there, especially when you look at the American League Central with the Royals and the Tigers. But you feel pretty good if you have the Nationals,
yeah,
Athletics, and Marlins coming up in a couple of weeks. So nothing where it's too grueling and you expect them to have a hard time getting through the rest of the month. So I think the conversation that we're having right now is probably the same conversation we're having in about 3 weeks from now, too.
yeah, absolutely. So they're in that good spot. things can get better and they can get on that hot roll. Everything, some of that pitching starting to pick up even more. But you've got some pieces in that offense. Matt Chapman did some nasty things against the Rockies. Willie Adames has
Yeah.
started to has picked up a couple of things. Rockies have a tendency to do that. They just help
They're
jumpstart
the
some
slump
players and
buster.
teams. Yeah,
Yeah, they're the slump buster of the league. Again, that's why all of these top teams are looking at the rest of their May schedule and circling the Rockies series.
yeah. So they've got some pieces that are starting to heat up a little bit, but it's Wilmer Flores who's found a home there. He's been looking good, but
Mhm.
is their DH. But it makes you even more glaring when you look over at who's playing first base this season. He's been good in the past at times, but this season not quite getting it done at an everyday level with LaMonte Wade Jr. over at first base, where we already talked about that even coming into the season, where first base seems a little weak for this Giants lineup coming into the season.
Yeah, and the credit where it's due, they always do a pretty good job of kind of finding the overachievers. A couple of organizations do that. One that comes to mind is the Cardinals. There's a lot of less heralded prospects that they find a way to make a role for. It can be very niche, but it works out for them. The Giants have been very good at that in their history too, and I think overall, LaMonte Wade Jr. is a success story. You can't deny
Yeah,
that. But it's the same way we talked about a couple of weeks ago, how Wilmer Flores is leading all of baseball in runs batted in. Hmm. That it doesn't feel very sustainable
yeah,
sometimes with the Giants. And I think with LaMonte Wade Jr., he's going through some real struggles this season. Again, doesn't mean he can't rebound, but you've kind of been on that pumpkin watch a little bit, waiting for that clock to strike midnight with some of these guys on the roster. And so far, Wade is putting up a 144, 250, 247 triple slash line at first base. And that's just not going to cut it. Full stop on that. So it was a position where you worried about it. How much are how long are these guys going to keep on being valuable contributors? And right now, it's not working out, and so you kind of have a hole at that position.
yeah. Because there's that scenario where he was really only ever facing righties, so
Hmm.
he'd never face lefties. He would typically he's your left-handed platoon bat over there at first base. No, and he's got a good eye. He'll walk a lot. He's not going to strike out a ton. No, he was able to even that out, but then he'd get his base hits. Last season, he had a 260 average and a 380 on base, and then also threw out 8 homers. The power's gone down. He's already, nope, he had 16 doubles last year. He has 6 this year. So he's almost on that pace. So you saw the decline a little bit in some aspects where he's more so just a contact first type of first baseman that can run into some power. Had
Hmm.
17 homers back in 23, but that in 2021 when he had 18, those seem more out of the norm than what he really is just a good contact, patient first baseman that can get on base. Maybe you kind of hope for something a little more.
Sure. Yeah, it might not be the ideal fit. Not
Yeah.
everybody can have a 45 home run bomber that you just plant over at first base. The Paul Goldschmidt anchor that was in Arizona for years and years. But you brought up a very good point about how they kind of have tried to make sure to put him in a position to succeed and really just putting him against right-handed pitching, letting him do what he does well without having to worry about struggling against same-handed pitching or anything like that. That role hasn't really changed. He has 38 games played, 30 against right-handed pitching. He has 100 plate appearances against righties compared to 13 against lefties. So it's not that they're just sticking him into the fire and saying figure it out. It's still the same role. It's just taking a dramatic step back in that
Yeah.
production against righties. So again, that's where it becomes fair to question, huh, is the clock running out basically
Yeah.
on Wade being a valuable contributor on an everyday basis for the Giants?
Yeah. No, like we've talked about, man, it would have been nice to maybe have a Pete Alonso on the team or any type of big slugging first baseman or good hitting first baseman they could have turned to. But for now, they're kind of stuck with what they have. And maybe you continue to look at that. Like we
Mhm.
mentioned before, maybe you just keep waiting and hoping Bryce Eldridge can catch fire, but that shouldn't be what you're hoping for. You
Yeah.
need something right now.
don't pin all your hopes on a 19-year-old coming in
Yeah.
and saving the day. That's a pretty easy one to throw out there. I think it stings double with bringing up Pete Alonso, because look at the numbers he's putting up with the Mets right now. Pete Alonso
Mhm.
is still being just an absolute mashing polar bear, doing what he does best. And on a separate note with that, you now have the emergence of Jung-Hoo Lee. He is showing that he's an all-star caliber player, just a star that you can kind of have as a centerpiece for your lineup. Feels like he's doing it a little bit without a safety net. Matt Chapman is great, don't get me wrong, but I don't think anybody is confusing Matt Chapman for an MVP
Yeah.
candidate anytime soon. It feels that much deeper and that much better if you have a known commodity like Pete Alonso, where it's just strictly the offense that you're getting out of that spot on an everyday basis. That's kind of the unsafe, that's the tight wire act that they're playing a little bit right now. Because what if the league figures out Jung-Hoo Lee now that they've had some time to expose to him? What if Matt Chapman does kind of regress to the mean a little bit offensively? Now are the Giants keeping up with the class of the National League West? Now do the Giants have enough to really be that playoff team, or do they just kind of fade during the stretch?
No.
I think that's just a very fair question to have. You can cherry pick Pete Alonso all day, like I've been doing, but man, it felt like the right answer at the right time for them, and they just didn't really care for it.
Yeah. No, and with LaMonte Wade Jr., kind of comparable to in sense of a a discount Luis Ariz, where okay, it's an on base guy, can draw
Sure.
walks, not going to strike out. Well, LaMonte Wade Jr. strikes out way more than Ariz does, who
Eh,
doesn't seem to do it at all half
yep.
the time. But no, if LaMonte Wade, it's I think the big thing is that average is
Mhm.
has never been super high. It's kind of league average, 250, 260, which is great, but you can handle that when he's got maybe a little more power in his bat, which he's done in the past, but it's just it hasn't been consistent enough for him where you got to find an answer at some point, especially if you're hanging around, you're still in that hunt, you're maybe a couple games out of the wild card, and you're like, okay, we got to figure something out here to lengthen our lineup.
Yeah, the way that nobody's ever really confused Matt Chapman for a slam dunk MVP candidate, I don't think anybody's really confused LaMonte Wade Jr. for an all-star stub or
Yeah.
anything like that. I guess the way that I put it in my head, what happens when a league average player falls below league average? Like that's kind of what you're facing. I feel like with Wade and the Giants. Time for time where you can still figure it out, but he just a 1 year, $5 million deal for a guy that's been a pretty okay player for you for the past couple of seasons. That's not one where it's inspiring a lot of faith in what you
Yeah.
have over there. And now the numbers are kind of showing, this is why we were risk adverse in the first place. So it is a genuine question and area of concern for this Giants roster right now.
Yeah. So hopefully they can figure something out here over the coming weeks and in the months and eventually when the trade deadline's going on. But let's round things out here with the Arizona Diamondbacks, who we've mentioned have those series coming up here against the Dodgers and the Giants. And I think of all these teams, as we've mentioned with the Diamondbacks, where it's a really important stretch for them. Just like we had talked about with the Dodgers, how important it is for them. This is really important for the Diamondbacks, who are fourth in the division. They've been off to a little bit slower start than the rest of these teams. Not all their pieces have been, their pitching hasn't been firing on all cylinders. But for a team that hopes to have strong playoff aspirations, these are some crucial series, early season series coming up here for the D-backs.
Yeah, 6 games behind in the division, that's not necessarily a clear indicator of them being flawed, but rather the high bar that this division sets. They're still right in there in the wild card race, so it's definitely not hitting the big red panic button.
Yeah.
Um, but one of the big things during the offseason, just don't be putrid in the first half. Have a good second half, like you are accustomed to, but don't spend all of your time trying to make up lost ground.
Yeah.
um, this is the stretch where Arizona could buck that trend, or they could just repeat the same mistake, so to speak. Where if you come out of this, next couple of weeks with only a handful of wins, and now all of a sudden you find yourself 5, 6, 7 games under 500 heading into June, crap, we're in the same spot we were in the last couple of
Mhm.
seasons, and we really need to start making up lost ground again. So, and this is also the first exposure that they're getting to the Dodgers, to the Giants, to some of their contemporaries around the West. So, man, these are the guys that they're having to compete for and battle to get ahead of when it's all said and done. And you need to kind of set a tone, I think, if you're Arizona right now, whether health is permitting or not. If you even if you're not at full strength, this is the time to not start falling apart a little bit because again, you got 7 games against the Dodgers, 3 against the Giants. You have a couple of feel goods in there with the Nationals, Pirates, and Rockies. So you have some margin for error, but those head-to-head matchups, as we mentioned in that Dodgers segment, those can come back to bite you really hard.
Yeah, and it's key for them, and it comes at a hard part because they are getting beat up in a lot of things. You've got maybe shoulder inflammation with Corbin Burns to just get a cortisone shot. You hope that'll address it, but still you got worries with the rest of that rotation and performance wise. And you hope, okay, hopefully our big free agent signing doesn't go down because we need these guys because the offense is doing its job. Corbin Carroll
Mhm.
doing work. Josh Naylor's been looking good. Offensively, for the most part, like we've talked about, they've been looking good. They're doing their part.
You get
It's the
Marte
pitching.
back.
Yeah, you'll
Yeah.
get Marte back and everything. So you've got things to be that you can put your hopes on that will carry you.
Mhm.
But then it's a classic of, well, can the pitching uphold? And we've talked about starting pitching before, but the bullpen was already a little bit of a question. There were some good pieces in there, but it's that bullpen that perhaps is their biggest need at the moment, especially after some injuries to Puck, he's down, and then Martinez has just gone down. You start to worry a little bit.
Yeah, these are a lot of your guys that you were figuring were going to be your end of game stalwarts, your closers, your setup guys. These were the guys that were going to shorten the game for you. And honestly, for a starting rotation that kind of hasn't been doing its part too,
Mhm.
now you're having a bullpen that is trying to carry the load and is also getting overtaxed, and injuries are starting to hit them pretty hard. So bullpens are volatile. I think you have enough faith in the arms that are in that rotation where you're confident that that won't be an ongoing problem. Now, if your brand new IKEA bed set doesn't come with all the screws, and you get really worried about putting that together, and
Mhm.
that's how you feel about Corbin Burns and that mega contract you had. And if he just now is starting to have shoulder problems, that's a whole other thing, though. That's an investment problem. Um, you think there's enough in the starting rotation to feel good about. But if that bullpen continues to get taxed and injuries keep on continuing to riddle it, it's a bit of a first world problem because bullpens are volatile in their nature inherently. But Shelby Miller and Jalen Beeks are who you're hanging your hat on right now.
Yeah.
Who had that on their bingo card heading into a season for anybody?
Yeah. No, you hope Kendall Graveman can come back soon. You can get a few reinforcements, but losing Puck to the 60-day IL, you've lost Martinez for the time being for at least the 15-day IL.
Kevin Ginkel's been up and down.
So you get a little worried long in the tooth when your rotation is already getting your bullpen's already getting taxed because the rotation's
Hmm.
not up to the standards you hope it would be. It's a recipe for disaster in the future if things continue the way they are.
Yeah, and they're 28th in baseball in F WAR right now with a negative point 0.2. That's a little misleading because the difference between 28th and 15th is marginal talking about
Yeah.
bullpens. So the stats don't really tell everything. It's like we mentioned, it's the eye test of knowing that this is a bullpen that's missing honestly its strongest pieces, and you worry will be missing them for the rest of the way. It's not just a couple of, oh, a hamstring pull or, oh, he got hit with a comebacker and
Mhm.
he'll be back, in a couple of weeks or something. These are major elbow shoulder concerns landing on long-term injured lists. So you kind of have to figure you're without rather than hope that they come back. Like that's the situation with a lot of these guys. And It could still work out. Like, I don't want to disparage Jalen Beeks and Shelby Miller because these are guys that have had very successful runs and have kind of resurrected themselves, Shelby Miller in particular, into very good known commodities in the bullpen. But a lot of times with their roles, they have not been leaned on to be the anchors of a bullpen.
Yeah.
It's not bringing in a Kenley Jansen for a year just to, round out a group, so to speak. Now, can Shelby Miller keep it going? I believe he can. But if you're a betting man, how much faith do you have in Shelby Miller putting up and continuing a peak Craig Kimbrell season? Because that's
Yeah.
kind of what he's doing, you know?
Yeah. You need who's going to be the reinforcements to help relieve the relievers, so to
Yeah, pretty
speak. Like
much.
who are the fresh arms that can come in and give some relief to these overtaxed arms, and fill the void left by a Puck and a Martinez and other guys. Who's going to step up and be a guy they can rely on for the time being over who knows how long, even if it's just for some of these series coming in. Who's going to be the guy they can bring up and throw some lockdown
Mhm.
innings against the Dodgers, against the Giants, and give them the chance to win? They're going to have to kind of cobble together a bullpen and just see what sticks, ride the hot hand, and see what else you can find.
Yeah, which I mean, it's not unprecedented. That's the way some teams have found success and rode it to championships, honestly, in years past. You think about the 2019 Nationals, they basically had Sean Doolittle and please God, just let Strasburg or Scherzer or Corbin be pitching.
Yeah.
Um, so it could work. It could work, but you feel very uncertain that it's going to get overtaxed and ultimately it's going to be their downfall in over the course of a year or in a playoff matchup against a Los Angeles or something like that. I would expect as we get closer to trade deadlines and more rumor mills coming up, Arizona to be very aggressive on bullpen pieces that are out there. That's for
Yeah.
sure.
Yeah. Good stuff.
Yeah, man.
We'll see. They're hanging out there, but a
Good
lot of
stuff
fun.
for a good division.
Yeah, a lot of good division and the Rockies. Uh, open for business, I say, for them.
Who needs a Nick Martini? Come on down. Shaken or stirred. Nick Martini, just for you.
By Nick Martini, you get bird for free.
Martinis and birds.
A
I think we
bird in
just
the
found a
hand is worth
speakeasy
martini
at
in the
the
bush.
yeah, the speakeasy over in the rooftop bar.
Yeah.
Martinis and birds. All right, we're off the rails.
Yeah.
Officially
All
now.
right, Kenneth, where can the folks find you?
You can find me on Twitter at KDub1988. Also hanging out over at purplerow.com.
Right on. You can find me over on Twitter at Skyler Timmins. Mikey Westside, welcome. You're catching us right here at the end as we're about to sign off. Find me over on Twitter at Skyler Timmins or on Blue Sky at stimmins13.bsky.social. Also, be sure to follow Blake Street Banner over on your favorite streaming platforms, YouTube, Twitch, favorite podcasting platforms, and over on social media with Blake Street Banner. And be sure to check out all the other offerings of their podcast feeds and shows over on YouTube. And you can always catch me over at Purple Row as well and doing stuff over with Rocky Mountain Rooftop doing podcasts there. But until next time, this has been Best of the West. And remember, the best is yet to come.